Hey guys, okay, so these are going to be showing tips part 2, and this is going to be more on like organizing and how to like help run the show smoothly for yourself and things you can do so you just stay organized throughout the day and you're not a total mess. My friend Kelsey is probably going to die laughing watching this because these are a lot of the tips I recommend and they'll really help you, and I should use them and I try to use them. But I tend to get unorganized at shows. So, if you use these, they will really help. But if you turn to like me and you prepare all this stuff and don't use it at the show, it won't help. So, anyways, the first tip I have is to print at least 2 copies of your class list. This will help you during the day because you can cross off what classes have gone. But this is also going to help you with everything else I'm about to run through pretty much. Also, I would print out a seating chart if your show has one, because it's easier to know where you're sitting or to have like a guide to find where you're sitting than to try and like stop somebody and ask someone because things are so hectic in the morning. Okay, so my first big organization tip is to pack in order-ish. And what I mean by that is everyone's going to do here what works best for you. Some people like take the class list and pack down. So what I do is I use the class list and I pack backwards. So obviously I would start like by this class list. If I had one, I would pack a Pegasus, then a unicorn, then the decorators, and so forth. And I would work myself all the way to the top of that list. That way, if I'm rushing to unpack, like let's say I arrive late to the show hall and I need to get my horses out because classes are starting soon, my thoroughbreds and standardbreds should be right there at the top of the box. So that's how I pack, and it can really help you. I mean, you have to do what's best for you, but obviously if you start packing these first, they should be on the bottom or in the last tub, and these should be in your first tub and at the top. So that's how I pack, and I think that can really help minimize your time at a show if you're rushing and if the classes are starting quickly and you're still trying to unpack. That way you're not unpacking all these horses that have forever for a class. That way you can get your ones out that need to go. Okay, so if you watch my friend Hannah's video, XX Slide Girl, I'll link it below. I document my collection the same way she does. The only thing I do differently is I have a show binder. And that is where I keep my references. And my show binder is a complete wreck, but that's okay. So in my show binder, what I do is I print all of my references. As you can see, that everything's out of order. I keep a breed list, like where certain breeds go in certain class types. I'll always put a copy of my Excel sheet. You can see a seating chart from my last show here. Usually I'd have an Excel sheet right here too, which is what have all my horses for the day. But what I do is I place my documentation in order of the class list. So by this class list, the first horse that should go is thoroughbred and standardbred. So first would be my thoroughbred and standardbred documentation. Then I'd put the next documentation in, and that would be warm bloods. And then I would do the next, and I would keep going all the way down the class list. And that's how I keep myself really organized for the day. That way, I'm not rushing to find documentation or having to flip through all these pages of stuff. All my documentation is in order. I know what's coming next. The only thing I do not recommend is on these plastic sheets. As you can see, I don't recommend, oh, that's not a good example. I don't recommend putting anything on the back of them because you might have a horse up on the table and then like in the hecticness of showing, you'll be like, oh, where's my next horse's documentation? I can't find it, and you'll start worrying, but it's really just on the back of the sheet. Did that a couple times, so I stopped putting documentation on the back. Each documentation gets their own plastic sleeve. You can get these plastic sleeves at Target in a huge pack, I think of like 100 for $3 or something. So they're the flimsier kind. They're not as good as some, but they work for documentation. So that is my tip for documentation. I really think it helps. I really think it cuts down on looking for documentation, and I really think it helps to keep you organized throughout the day. Okay, so I already said that I use an Excel sheet to keep track of my placings. Obviously, I just write the horse's placing next to his name on the little spot sign, and that's how I keep up with it. But if you're having trouble and you don't have an Excel sheet, you can either write your placings. If you write your horse's names out here, and that's how you keep track of them through the day, you could just write the placings next to there. You can also write that horse's name on the back of their ribbons. Now, I don't usually remember, I mean, some of them I do, but I don't always remember my horse's show names. So what I'll do is on the back of that ribbon, I'll write the mold name. Like it'll be Stormwatch, or it'll be Bosco, or it'll be Lyrico. But normally I never resort to that because I just write it down on my Excel sheet, and that keeps everything in track for me. And then when I get home, I can totally organize it. The other tip I have that I definitely don't use, but I've seen some people use, is to set your horses on your table as they'll go up. So you would basically line your horses up. If thoroughbred was the first class, you put thoroughbreds, and if warm bloods followed, you put your warm bloods, and then so on and so on and so on. That's a really good tip if you have a big show string or you have like a lot of classes right after each other. I don't do that. It wouldn't work with the way I set my horses up, like certain ones that have to lay down, certain ones that, you know, like don't fit in the little stall or little section I have for them. It wouldn't work for me, but I've seen some people do it and it seems to be really helpful. Some things that you might want to have at your show, because they're going to come in real handy if you need them, and then it's going to be sad if you don't have them, are things like extra pins. Plenty of pins, because pins can go missing. I've accidentally had people walk off with my pins, or I've left them somewhere and someone else has picked it up. So take yourself a couple extra pins. Pins can get scarce. Acrylic paints or pastel paints. This is all going to depend on your level of comfort here. Even charcoal, pencils, things like that. These are really good to have in case a horse gets like a rub or something really small that you just need to touch up really quickly before a show or before it goes on the table. I know it sounds really scary, but if you think you have the ability to do it, it can really be helpful. And you just got to be careful, like, to make sure you don't glob it on there or anything, that you can do it lightly. Take like a little Q-tip or something. The one thing I will say that I really like about the acrylics and the pastels is that, let's say you want to cover it up for the show, but you plan to send it back to the artist. Most of the times, I'm not the best person to take for this advice, so I don't swear by this, but it's been in my experience that if I use acrylics or pastels to touch up my horse at a show and I want to send it back to the artist, all I have to do is lightly get a little bit of water on my finger and rub that area where the pastels or acrylics were applied, and it'll come right off and I can send it to the artist. Now, I'm not going to say that never would take off extra paint, and I really wouldn't risk that on one of my really, really good resins, but on the original finishes and stuff, I think you'll be okay. Like I said, for artist resins, it can be a lifesaver at a show. You just have to be really careful. You need a dust brush to dust your horses off and get in the little crevices. You can go to Walgreens or your local drugstore, CVS, whatever, and pick these up. I get the big ones and at least one of the little tiny ones. Little tiny ones are good for like Stormwatch's mane and things that have a lot of crevices. The big one is good for like an overall dusting. If I could only get one, I'd get a big one though, because you can get in there with the little ones with a big brush, but it's just easier if you can get a little brush. You also want to make sure you have a really nice piece of soft cloth, like a felt or something, in case you have to lay a horse down on the table, because I don't want to lay a horse down on the table with nothing under it, or even bubble wrap, because bubble wrap's uneven. It can make them shaky or awkward, things like that. So having a nice big cloth that you can kind of fold in half and put the horse on is really helpful. For original finishes, I've also seen people use like the connoisseur bags and things like that. Something that will give them protection from the table. What I like about the felt cloth is that it gives it a lot of